Okay, welcome to the College of Complex. Is this thing working?
I have no idea.
Well, it's a while ago.
It's only working out of this speaker.
You probably spoke too loud and broke it.
Something happened.
It's working.
Testing. Okay, now it's working.
It is working.
It quit working.
Squeaky.
Your inside voice.
My inside voice. I got too much sound here.
Well, I can't hear that.
Why do we have?
We used to talk to hundreds of people without a microphone, and now when we got this little room, we need it back.
You have to be so squeaky, Tom?
Do you really need it?
Yeah.
You have a loud voice.
Does this have
How does this thing get down like this?
We can hear you loud and clear. He has right in his ear.
Testing. In the left ear, it's doing really good.
Testing.
Okay, we'll try it again. Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 417th meeting since we started in February 2009. With a different speaker in every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is.
Yeah. Too loud.
Too loud?
You can have some of your cellars.
Oh, you can have my sound.
Is that a little better? All right. Thank you. We give our speaker an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter. There's only one fool at a time, one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers, not speeches. Questions and answers of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. Our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and a comment that closes the meeting. That's how it works. So before we introduce our speakers, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to do it. You got any announcements you want to make? Anybody?
I'll wait till the end.
I do.
Come on up here. Make your announcement.
Okay, now that we're in summer, I just want to remind everybody, I was at the North Park Mall today and saw a friend from my JCC, and she had a little spot on her cheek, and it was skin cancer, and the doctor cut half of her face up. So please wear your sunscreen. That's my announcement. Wow, thank you.
I have one that's my leaflet here.
Announcements are now if you want.
No, we oh, Pat,
Just read that.
Karen.
I'll
There's
just have to pass it on.
We'll pass these out. This is his leaflet. He says his announcement right there.
Thank you, thank you.
This is an announcement.
Thank you. Oh, that's right.
Gene, you want to make an announcement on this? Go ahead.
Well, Bastille Day, it turns out, is Woody Guthrie's birthday. And so we're going to make a fundraiser for KNON Radio and the Dallas AFL-CIO over at the Union Hall, 1408 North Washington, on the morning, at 11 o'clock on the morning of Bastille Day, July 14th. And it's going to be like a sing-along, like Woody would have done.
Do you want more musicians?
Yeah,
Okay, I know some.
You gotta go through sing too.
yeah, we're still looking for performers.
Yeah, I have.
We got 7 of them, but mostly it's going to be audience participation.
Was there a lot of singing at Bastille Day?
I don't know. But there was for Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
Any other announcements? You got any announcements you want to make?
No announcement.
No announcement, all right.
I'm here.
He's here. That's an announcement in itself. All right, next week is, Max Smith's going to be our speaker. He's going to talk about how bad it is, a perspective on gun violence. I don't know who will draw in here, but that'll be good. June 30th, What the Left Really Wants. Ken Sauter, he's sitting here someplace, or he was. He's going to be our speaker.
Where is he?
He's not here.
He's not here today.
He's not here. I thought he was here, but he's not here.
He was here in spirit.
Here in spirit, yes. Then
His hearing is very good.
July 21st, obtaining self-improvement through individual personnel inventory. That's Dr. Chris Bolt, he'll be here. July 28th, Russiagate, especially as it relates to militarism and U.S.-Russia relations. There's a woman going to talk about that, it's quite interesting. Anyway, that'll be on Jan, and that's our lineup coming up. I don't want to read all this, you have it in front of you. Our speaker tonight is Gene Lantz. He's going to talk about why economics is doomed to failure. He's a longtime labor activist from UAW 848, where he is on the executive board as president of retirees. He's a recording secretary, archivist, and editor in the Dallas AFL-CIO. On the executive board at Digital Communicator at Sergeant Arms. Gene is also secretary of the North Dallas UAW Area Retiree Council and serves as state secretary of the Texas Alliance for Retired Americans. He offers brief reviews of classical economics, international economics, and financialization. Gene argues that the economies cannot stand alone as an explanation for what happens. Only when it's combined with other disciplines, especially politics, can economics explain what happens. Some of these ideas he went on to put anyway. Our speaker tonight is Gene Lantz, and without further ado, I give you Gene Lantz.
I got off to a great start. I spilled salad dressing all over my notes.
Give them more flavor.
Yeah. I have an ulterior motive in doing this, and it is to try to get people to guide back. Can you hear me?
I can.
Because you can sit here, you can take my seat.
No, I'm trying, I just, you
Okay.
know, I've been in the hot sun all day.
So
We're back here.
As I have said from this podium before, as recently as May, I'm frustrated by the fact that we're in the middle of the biggest upsurge in American history of the progressive movement, and yet we're not working together. We're pulling every which way. So I'm trying to get people to study the nature of the system in which we live, because I think if we agreed about what's happening, we might have a more likelihood that we would come together on a program, as to what we wanted to do about it. So to that end, I started a Facebook group called PolyEcon. Originally, I wanted to call it Political Economics, but that was already taken. And it was way, it was really very academic, very intellectual. And so I didn't want to invite people into that, so I just started a new one and started inviting ordinary people like us. Now, I would like to have a better idea of how many of you are billionaires. If you're a billionaire and you're not embarrassed, okay. How many of you are the children of billionaires? Because you know the saying, it says, not all rich men are thieves. Some of them are the sons of thieves. So, no billionaires. I am very, very grateful to come here. I'm very, very grateful to be invited and that you allowed me to come. But what I really want to do is speak in some of those mansions over in Highland Park, or at Highland Park Library, or someplace or at Walmart. Alice Walmart lives over in Fort Worth, and why don't I ever get invited there? Actually, they have a restraining order against me.
Oh,
So that may be why the Walmart people don't want me. But I would really like to be able to talk about economics with billionaires. And I'm very, very grateful, though, to get a chance to talk about it with you. And of course, my presentation will be fairly short, and then, it's your turn, and I know you're going to have some really good ideas. Last time I was here, I got some really great ideas for things that I'm writing. I should confess right away, though, that I lied to you. Just to get you here, I said that economics doesn't work. And of course, that isn't true. Economics does work very, very, very well. It just doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for ordinary people who have to work for a paycheck. It works great for the billionaires, and that's why I asked if there were any billionaires. The goal of economics, I had to look this up on Wikipedia. This is what it says. The ultimate goal of economics is to improve the living conditions of people in their everyday life. Isn't that beautiful? It's complete malarkey. But that's what economics is supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to be about. And I'm going to argue that for you and me, that's not true, that it doesn't work for you and me. That what the economists have to tell us is not really for you and me. And I'm consulting several books, starting kind of in order of when they were written. This is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, in which he says that there's an invisible hand that makes everything beautiful for all of us. This is Capital. It's about 100 years later, not quite 100 years later, Karl Marx wrote Capital, which had an entirely different approach to economics. I won't be talking about that very much, but if you're interested, I have a school of economics on one of my websites, and you can find it by going to genelance.org, and then it'll tell you what the other website is. The other website is in Danish. So this one, there are still people who use the term political economy, and there are still books that on political economy, but they're all Marxists. If it says political economy, it's going to be Marxist, right? Then there are just some general books. Economics for Everyone. What do I do? If I move back here, okay. Economics for Everyone, What's Ahead. Most books, including the one Adam Smith wrote, aren't really scientific. They aren't really theories that you can take and apply and predict the future or explain the past very well. What they basically do is explain things that are going on right at that time. And Adam Smith wrote his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, and he lived in Britain. And things were going very, very well for Britain at that time. They ruled the world. And they had the manufacturing sewed up for the entire world. So things really looked great, and he wrote a book explaining about why they were going so great. And it was The Invisible Hand. An important book is The Great Crash of 1929, John Kenneth Galbraith.
What is that? The Great Crash of...
The Great Crash. I'm going to put all these out. Actually, I can hand them around if you want to.
Yeah.
You want to handle them?
Yeah.
Just, would you mind just taking the first one and pass it on back? He was just, he was trying to explain the Depression, because the other economists are all, caught flat-footed. This was not supposed to happen. And so then he wrote that one. This is just a general one. Then in about the 1990s, 1980s, unions started publishing books because things had started to turn really, really bad for working people. And this one was written by the president of the Machinists Union, basically just saying that if everybody had more money, the economy would be better. And this one is written by a right-winger, Lou Dobbs, about outsourcing. But outsourcing was a very important economic idea in the 1980s. Downsizing America, same thing. By the 1980s, people were getting really, really conscious about this. Now here's a book that had a profound effect on me. This was written by our friend, Jorg Rieger. And I'm sure at least half of you know Jorg Rieger. He lived here in Dallas. He was a theologian at SMU. And he wrote this book called No Rising Tide.
We all know his wife, too.
And we know his wife, Rose Marie, probably came to this forum. So, there's a picture of Jorg back here if you don't remember it. He starts off by saying that economists are not scientists. And he goes a little further and says that they are high priests. They're the druids. They're the guys who spout some other language and then tell you mysteriously, you know, what you have to do. And he says, his point is that they need to combine with other disciplines. And in his case, it was particularly theology. He thought theologists and economists should be working together to try to explain what's happening. This book is a particular favorite of the union movement, Runaway Inequality. About 2 years ago, the Communication Workers of America bought thousands of these books and gave them away because they wanted everybody to read what this had to say. This tried to explain what happened to working people in America, why things were not getting better for working people in America while the inequality was going crazy. You know, back in say 1975 or so, the average chief executive officer was making maybe 50 times as much money as the average worker. I looked it up today. It said it's 333 times as much. And some of these authors say it's much more. So inequality has really gone crazy. And this is a book all about this. And this book covers the period from the late 1970s to the present. It's full of graphs showing that working people got screwed. And it says emphatically and over again that it was government policy to do so. In other words, government intervention deliberately created all of the inequality. It wasn't like that before, he says. Wasn't like that before, say, 1975. And it doesn't have to be like that after now. That's his point. And, yes?
Would that be government or corporate interference with government?
No, it would be government interference. It would be government policy. He said, in fact, I mean, almost everybody agreed with it as soon as they saw it. They taught classes. There's a guy named Herb Keener that was on my radio show this morning. And Herb Keener teaches classes on this book. And he said on the radio this morning that he's going to do some more of them. And when he does, he gives you a free copy. And it's a very, very worthwhile book. But it says that the period from 1975 or so to the present was very, very exceptional. That it was caused and created by the government on purpose. And especially carried out in the name of Ronald Reagan. So,
Corporate America.
trickle-down economics, yeah. This book I liked a lot better. This book is called An Extraordinary Time. This is a public library book, by the way. I have to turn it in tomorrow, so don't take it in. An Extraordinary Time. He says that the period from 1975 to present was not the extraordinary time. He says that what's going on now is just ordinary capitalism. This is the way the system works. He says the extraordinary time was that funny period between World War II and the late 1970s, in which people did pretty well. Productivity went up, and people got raises. You know, the rich people got richer too, but workers got raises and did pretty well during that period. He says that's the extraordinary time. That's when things were weird. The rest of this is just capitalism. So, I like this one because of that. But I will say this about this book. This guy discredits every economist that come before him without much of a comment as to what you want to do about it. I mean, he didn't like Adam Smith and he didn't like anybody else all the way up to him. This book, this man would have been terribly, terribly famous if we had had a crash in 2016. But this is a really good book anyway. He says that what's going on now is very unstable. And he did have a couple of quotes in here that are really worthwhile. One thing is he starts off talking about a guy named Joe Stack. I don't know if any of you knew Joe Stack. Died in 2010.
Airplane.
But he was in the newspapers. You remember that. Okay. Joe Stack wrote this note. He said that the communist creed is from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The capitalist creed is from each according to his gullibility, to each according to his greed. And that was in his suicide note before he set his house on fire and then went and got his airplane and crashed it into the Internal Revenue Service and killed the receptionist there. Okay, but this guy does have some good advice. His name is Tom Hartman. This is good advice, and I almost used this for my ending, but I found one that was better. He says that economic royalists are what's ruining everything. And here says, this is a quote, because just as democracies will always have economic royalists looking for ways to subvert them to their own ends, they will also always have people who remember the lessons of history. People who know the possibility of a stable world at peace. People willing to sacrifice and work and put themselves on the front lines of history to build a better world. Find them. Celebrate them. Become one of them. I thought that was cool. Now, this was my favorite of all those books. He also discredits all the economists who came before him. I mean, that seems to be a characteristic of all of the recent books. Am I wrong about that? All the recent books, they discredit everybody because of the Great Recession. These are books that came out after the Great Recession. And they're saying that nobody could have anticipated the Great Recession. That's what they're saying. That is not true. There was a woman right here in Dallas. Her name was Danielle DiMartino. Does anybody remember that? She wrote the investment column for the Dallas Morning News. And I don't think she wrote every day. It was like four or five times a week. Remember her?
Yes, I do.
Back in 2010 or
Yes.
2005, 2006. And she warned us over and over again.
She did.
She said that the only test that they have before they give somebody a mortgage is the breath test. In other words, they hold a cold sword in front of their nose to see if they're breathing, and if they are, they get a mortgage. And then that mortgage paper is what went on to become, the great fiasco of 2007, 2008, and caused the Great Recession. So Danielle DiMartino darn sure knew about it, even though she wasn't even an economist. She was just a writer for the Dallas Morning News, and they fired her. You could read Danielle DiMartino, and then turn the page and read the guy who does the housing investment stuff for the Morning News. He still does. He's still there.
What's his name?
I don't know his name. She would write that things are getting really precarious, especially in the mortgage market. And then you turn the page, this other guy would say, everything is great. Never been better. They fired her and kept him. He's still there. I cannot find out for the life of me whatever happened to Danielle DiMartino. I've Googled her a half a dozen times trying to find out whatever happened to her. Do you know?
No, No, I don't. Well, when she
just disappeared.
Well, her last column, she said that she was going to go and try to help the situation by working in the banking business.
So she went to work for a bank?
That's what, you know, that's what she said, yes.
Okay. This book is by Jeff Madrick. And he has, I think, some real solutions. He says that all the economists before him, you know, were not scientific, that they didn't have theories that you could use to explain things and to predict what was going to happen. But he says that doesn't mean economics is worthless or useless. He said it's very good and it's getting better all the time. But it needs to be used along with other disciplines, and particularly with politics. So, this, to my opinion, this is the best one of all the books that have come out since the Great Recession. We're going to have some comments about some other good economists in the discussion. There was a time when philosophers like Karl Marx would talk about economics, and they called that political economy. That was the normal term for it. But a guy came along at the end of the 19th century. His name was Alfred Marshall. He was British. And he said, you don't need all those other disciplines. He said, economics stands on its own. It's a science. And I've got all these numbers. I've got all these statistics that will show you how scientific it all is, because you can do numbers and you sound scientific. So Alfred Marshall is considered the first economist. He was the first one to ignore politics and to just say that economics stood on its own. And Alfred Marshall is still the guy that if you take economics in college, this is what you're going to get. This is what Alfred Marshall said. It's this. This is your first day of economics. They'll show you this and say this explains everything. And then if you take more courses for the rest of your college career, they'll explain all the exceptions as to how this doesn't actually work. But here's how it's supposed to work. This is a graph. Quantity of things produced and sold, commodities produced and sold, is this way on the graph. And the price of commodities is this way on the graph, going up and down. So, demand, when price is very high, like way up here, wait a minute. When price is very high, supply goes very high. When supply goes, a lot of quantity. In other words, let's say you're making and selling toothbrushes, and they're normally 29 cents, but the price goes up to 49 cents. So you start making more of them, so you can make more money off of this higher price, right? So as the price goes up, you start making and selling more toothbrushes. Demand, on the other hand, goes the other way. When the price goes high, demand falls because people don't want to buy stuff at high prices. Where the two things cross is the magical, perfect price. That's where the invisible hand has done its magic. And this is what they call the market. And it's how everything works. And it's perfect. We should have known when somebody said something was perfect. We should have known when they started talking about the invisible hand that something was amiss. That we should have started rolling our eyes and going dee 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 dee, because what's this about the invisible hand making everything perfect? Now, in order for this to work, even Alfred Marshall said it has to have certain assumptions. One of those assumptions is that the market is made up of rational men. There's no women involved, I'm sorry.
That's good.
And all the men are rational. Perfectly rational. They also have all the information they need. If I was talking about toothbrushes, these are toothbrush experts. And also they have the freedom to do what they want to do when they look at marketing conditions. So if the price, like I said, if the price of toothbrushes goes up, you start making more of them, making and selling more of them. If the price goes down, you make fewer of them, you lay people off. So this is supposed to work with these assumptions. And this little thing in red here is, I mentioned that I have a little school on economics. That's the URL for it. I don't think you can see it well enough to copy it, but you can copy it afterwards if it interests you. That's just a little school on economics as far as commodities go. And commodities are not it's not that simple. Because I was talking about toothbrushes as a commodity. And you can kind of see how this would work. If the price of toothbrushes goes up, people will make more of them. There'll be less demand because people won't want to buy them if they're higher priced. And the price of tape just went up because I lost my, oh, here it is. So I wanted to keep this in front of you because this is how the magic works. This is how the magical hand works. Alfred Marshall did this in the late 19th century, and it's to this day what they teach you in college. And I said a while ago that it has been claimed that economists are really priests spouting undecipherable languages and shrouded in mystery, which I got that from Georg Rieger. He said that they were arcane voodoo merchants. But this is all supposed to work, and you're supposed to be comforted by it. You're supposed to believe in it. You're supposed to think that this is for you. It's not for you. What's your commodity? Any toothbrush makers in here? You may have been in manufacturing. I don't know. I forgot to ask that when I asked you if you were billionaires. But I have a notion. I have a notion that most of you worked for a paycheck, like I did, until I retired. Now I work for Social Security. But if you worked for a paycheck, then what's your commodity? You're not selling toothbrushes. What are you selling? You're selling your labor, right? You're selling yourself. You're selling your time and your work. Well, you don't care about the demand. You don't care about the price. I mean, you'd like to have more money than or not, but you have to go to work every day, don't you? So this doesn't work for you. Not if your commodity is your labor. You don't have the freedom to decide on the basis of the market. If you did, you could say, oh, the price is too low, so I'm not going to work for the next 3 weeks. Yeah, and you lose your house and your kids. So it doesn't work for you. It never did. It was never meant for you. It was made for people who make and sell toothbrushes. And yet you're supposed to be comforted by this. The system is supposed to work and you're supposed to believe in it. Capitalism, said John Maynard Keynes, an economist of the 1930s, very highly respected by many people. He said, capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greatest good for everyone.
What a joke.
My main criticism, or the main criticism I think that's leveled by other economists, is that economics does not work alone. It has to be combined with other ideas. Imagine for a moment that people really were rational men. I don't think the economy is being run by rational men. That would be the Koch brothers, for example. I think the economy is being run by sociopaths.
Amen.
Not rational men at all. But that's overstating the case, I suppose.
No, it's not.
One of the arguments that they present, this came about, I think, largely, it kind of came together when Reagan got elected president. Now, you remember Ronald Reagan. Remember, he was a very good movie star. He used to be one of my favorites. And he made some very liberal movies. He used to actually be quite the liberal at one time. But he got to be president of the United States by, I mean, he honed his skills as a shill for General Electric. General Electric is a giant corporation. And they hired him to go around and speak for them, not just to sell their products, but also to sell their ideology. The idea that big corporations are really, really good for you and that this is what you really need. He was really, really very, very good at what he did. And he became president of the United States. Now, according to this Madrick book, he didn't really have an ideology or an economic model that he wanted to follow, but then he got to meet Milton Friedman, who was a very important economist from Chicago, I guess. And Milton Friedman said, well, no, let me start with what Reagan said. He said, I don't know anything about economics, but I know what I want. I want to give all the money to the big corporations, and I want to take it away from the little people. Then came Milton Friedman, a very highly respected economist, who said, guess what? I think that you could bring up a bunch of statistics and talk, and you could convince people to give everything to the big rich corporations and take it away from the little people. So Reagan said, this is what I need. So this became the basis of what we call Reaganomics. And that's what we've been suffering against ever since. What Milton Friedman basically was saying is that there's an invisible hand that is making everything all right for all people. During that period, I don't know if you remember, we stopped talking about the invisible hand and started talking about the invisible finger, which was not making things better for ordinary working people. But that was Milton Friedman's argument, and it suited Mr. Reagan very well. So that continued. Now, they don't always say that they don't want government intervention. They say the very, very rich, the Koch brothers and people like that, and Ronald Reagan, they do want government intervention if they, for example, want to drill on public lands. Then government intervention is very good. There was an article just last week about some giveaways that Energy Commissioner Rick Perry is making to the energy companies. And people were saying, well, what about government intervention? You're supposed to be against government intervention. He said, well, not in this case. Because even though they usually say they're against government intervention, not if it comes to a big giveaway for the very, very wealthy, like the $1 trillion giveaway that they did last December. So they say that government intervention began in the 1930s and has never been good and has always messed things up. And so Milton Friedman would say, get out of it, do just a little bit for the money supply, but other than that, no government intervention and no unions, because those unions distort the market. So this is what we're still suffering under. This is the philosophy that's been pretty much government philosophy, and it wasn't just Republicans. It wasn't just Republicans, but it's been pretty much the dominant philosophy that government has operated under ever since the late 1970s, including Jimmy Carter. So Jeff Madrick, commenting on Friedman, he hated Friedman. It's one thing I liked about the book. He got down on Friedman every few pages, and he said not only was Friedman's denial of government's importance wrong-headed, but his ideal world never existed. We have always had government intervention. The American Revolution was conducted, they had to take all the people's money and put it into the war. So war spending was started in this country, yes ma'am?
Okay, which guy was the one who's so down on Milton Friedman?
Well, basically all of them since,
The one you were just talking about, you know, like every
okay,
page.
Jeff Madrick,
Jeff Madrick?
Madrick. Yeah, that's the one that I held up last, that I said I liked it the
It
best.
never came back here.
That never came.
Oh, they're still going around. Okay. All right. Take your time with it. But I have to give that one back to the library tomorrow.
Oh, well, we want to borrow it.
Well, it'll be available at the library tomorrow. So we've always had government interference. So the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, then in the 1820s, the government started taking some responsibility for education. Then there was a Civil War. And then after the Civil War, they started giving all this land to the railroads. That was all government intervention into the economy. We've always had a great deal of government intervention into the economy. The difference in the 1930s was that they did it for a different reason. They weren't just giving it away to be giving it away. They were actually trying to save capitalism from itself during the Great Depression. And that's how Keynes and Keynesianism got to be so well known. No. Then some things have happened since the great classical economists were talking about the way commodities are produced and distributed. And that's pretty much what economics is most of the time. They talk about the manufacturing and distribution of commodities. You know, just like the food you just ate. Some things that happened that made it much more complicated. One of them was World War. Back in those days when they invented all this stuff, they had never had a World War. World War I was fought essentially to see who was going to exploit Africa and Asia. The United States already had South America pretty well sewed up, but the European countries had divided Africa quite a bit. Portugal had some of it, France had some of it, Germany had a little, England had a lot, and of course England was the big exploiter in Asia. And the Germans wanted a bigger piece of that, so we fought a terrible war, millions of deaths over that, but that affected the economy like nothing ever before. For one thing, the commodities that were produced were not commodities that anybody could use. I mean, how do you use bombs? You can't do anything with them except blow them up. And so if you're spending all your money making bombs, then it's pretty profoundly different than this. So that made things quite different. And then something happened. I think it kind of grew out of the fact that there was so much government intervention into the economy that we started having all these financial instruments that were not commodities. A financial instrument is, like a mortgage, for example, or a bond. You know, after the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve started just printing up these bonds and selling them like crazy. And the very, very rich people were buying those and getting the interest on them, so it worked out great for them. But there was not very much money went to poor people to solve the Great Recession. Pretty much all was it called TARP? All of that money mostly went to the banks. Some of it went to the very same people who had caused the problem. And this is called financialization of an economy. This is new. It doesn't have a darn thing to do with economics because it's just paper changing hands. In fact, it's not even paper because they do it on computers. And somebody asked me the last time I was here about George Soros. I don't know beans about George Soros, but I looked him up and found out that he made his billions not with any commodities. He didn't sell toothbrushes. He traded currencies. He would buy sestertians and trade them for krona and and then take that and put them into Kiwis and convert that to dollars or something, or euros, and apparently he really knew what he was doing because he made billions doing it. According to Wikipedia, he made $1 billion in one day because he bet against the British pound. And the British pound tanked, and George Soros made $1 billion in one day, and there wasn't a single toothbrush involved. So when you study classic economics about commodities, it may not even be relevant because what's going on today is financialization. Now, after the Great Recession, during the Obama years, they tried to regulate these markets and tried to make it so that could not happen again. But if you're reading the papers today, you know that the Trump administration is unregulating them again. So look out for more financialization. I hope I've shed a little bit of light, or maybe just stirred up some questions. I hope you'll be interested enough to join my study group. The way you do this is you get on Facebook and you put this in the search thing, poly-econ, poly-econ. Don't put political economy, you'll get a different group. Poly-econ, and then you say join group. And then I have to give you permission. I'm going to keep the armchair socialists out. You know, the people who just want to talk and don't really do anything. So I would encourage you to do that, and let's just try to find out how this system works so that we might be able to come together on a program to change it. Now I want to say one last quote, and this happened before financialization, before the Great Recession. In fact, it happened in the 1960s, and the quote is from Dr. Martin Luther King. I picked him because he's really hard to argue with. I may be a pushover, but it's really hard to argue with Dr. Martin Luther King because you know he meant well. And you know he was pretty smart and pretty effective. And so here's what he said. Capitalism does not permit an even flow of economic resources. With this system, a small privileged few are rich beyond conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. That's the way the system works. And since we know that the system will not change the rules, we are going to have to change the system. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Thank you.
You just sit there and answer questions.
Now questions and answers. He's got the microphone.
Who wants to be first?
I do.
Gene, I don't understand financialization. I don't get what it is.
Okay. My point about financialization is that it has nothing to do with
But I don't even know
commodities.
what it is. I mean, what do? You just take bogus commodities and assign them a value? I mean,
No, they're not commodities at all. Have you ever seen the movie The Big Short?
yes, I have.
Well, that was about financialization. What happened in the Great Recession, and to the best of my ability, I'll try to explain. First of all, people were getting really bad mortgages. They call them subprime mortgages. People that should not have gotten a mortgage were getting them. People that were never going to be able to pay those mortgages off were getting mortgages. Then they were bundling them and say, I got 100 of these things, and who will give me $10 million for it? Because, you know, the idea was that they were going to pay the mortgages off and you'd get $11 million back, you know. So they sold them for large amounts of money. And then people resold them. And then they they had insurance policies and say, I'm going to sell you insurance that those people really will pay off. If they don't really pay off, I'll pay you back. So you could buy insurance on these bad mortgages. And this is all just paper. or you can think of it as paper, metaphorically. Wasn't really necessarily paper, because a lot of it was just done on computer, right? So somebody said, I just bought 300 mortgages, and then when you add up all the numbers on those mortgages, it's $10 million, and I got it for 8. Man, I am doing great. I'll sell it to you for 9. And so then they would trade these things. But it had nothing to do with commodities. It had nothing to do with the economy as we understand it. And yet people were making millions and millions and millions, and maybe billions of dollars by buying and selling these things.
So is it kind of like where loans become a commodity if you buy and trade?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because before,
Have you?
loans were never purchased,
Right. But they are now.
but they are now, so a loan.
How many got a student loan now? And how many have been done for your student loan? And you get done by some guy that has nothing to do with it. Maybe you got a student loan from bank ABC, and this guy calls you and he says, I own your loan now, and you have to pay your student loan. They sell those debts.
They sell.
Yeah.
It's nearly all, it's debts and bonds. Well, a bond is a debt when you think about it. You buy a savings bond, a $5,000 savings bond, and keep it 10 years, and it's supposed to be worth $10,000. And you could sell it along the way for $6,000, couldn't you? Well, that's what they do. They buy and sell worthless paper, IOUs, and it's just gambling. And they finally got caught when some of those mortgages started coming due, and people said, well, we can't really pay that. Because they never should have had a mortgage to begin with. Then the guy who owned all that said, okay, I want the insurance guy that I bought insurance for this other guy, he's supposed to pay me, and then he said, well, I don't really have that much money. So they started tanking. And I don't know the details, but it's in that movie, The Big Short. Some people figured it out. I think they read Danielle DiMartino. But anyway, they figured it out, and they sold short. They sold a bunch of mortgages that they didn't own because they knew the price was going to come down, and they made millions, if not billions. I don't know how much they made, but they made a lot of money. So some people did understand it. I didn't, but Danielle DiMartino apparently did. And I feel terrible. You told me she went to work for a bank.
At the end, she said she was good. No, wait a minute. Maybe I'm misremembering. I think she said, I'm going to go and work in the private sector to try to help things. So, but,
I think they fired her because she just disappeared one day. She was just gone. And the other guy, the guy who kept saying everything was just fine, he's still there.
yeah, well, what about that other economist that disappeared just recently? The one that kept saying, the guy from Boston, he's a professor in Boston, that the stock market is way, way too high. I forgot his name, and that he was gone one day. I mean, gone.
Really?
Yes.
I don't know this story. Do you know it?
That was 40.
Well, okay, any other questions? I don't really understand financialization. I just know that it's not what you're going to learn in an economics class. It's something new. It's got nothing to do with commodities. A commodity is something that is made to be traded or sold. And when you study economics, it's all about commodities. But nowadays, it's not. George Soros never made a toothbrush in his life, and he's made himself a billionaire just by trading one kind of currency against another one.
Yeah, Gene, have you ever come across a lady called Brooks Lee Bourne? She actually predicted that these derivatives, which is all about this gambling on the way commodities and other such things move, and this was in the mid-90s. And she said this would cause a disaster. And of course, the Clinton gang, Rubin, Larry Summers, and Alan Greenspan got rid of her, actually.
What was her name?
A lady called Brooks Lee Bourne.
She spelled the
Brooks Lee, and then Bourne, B-O-R-N. But she graduated from Stanford first in her class, okay? She was a very bright lady, and she could see, and she was the head of the Communities Futures Commodity Exchange, which was a tiny commission, but she realized when she began to look into this, what disaster it was going to be. And of course, the Democrat administration shut it down, got rid of her. And she resigned, actually. They took away her powers. And of course, that was the time when our friend from South Texas and his
Phil
wife,
Gramm.
the Grahams, okay, were stealing from the public and passing all kinds of laws to help Enron. Look how great that ended. So we, as our friend said, there were crooks in high places, all right, and they got away with it. But anyway, she's a very, if you read about her, she's a very interesting lady. Another case where the guys just shut her up and got rid of her, but she was perfectly right.
The Financial Services Modernization Act,
Right.
sponsored by Phil Gramm in the Senate,
Graham, Leach, and Bliley.
and also supported in the House by this guy that lives in Irving. He's still over there, I think. I can't remember his name. But they passed the Financial Modernization Act. They always make up these great names. But what it meant was that the banks could basically do anything they wanted. And that's what they did, anything they wanted. And they made millions, and they didn't really hurt in the Great Recession. Their recession was not like your recession. Their recession was over in 2009. I bet you were shocked when you picked up the paper in 2009 and found out that the recession is over, and you still had your kids living with you, or your grandkids, or your kids and your grandkids still living with you, because they couldn't get jobs and couldn't make a living. So their recession was over 2009, and they got all this bailout money from your tax money.
So, Gene, why do you think the Democrats just allowed the Dodd-Frank legislation to be watered down to be irrelevant, really?
You mean the current Democrats?
Well, the Obama Democrats, man. Well, you know, the whole Congress.
Yeah, I'm not aware that the Democrats are at fault recently, but certainly the Clinton administration was, and he was a Democrat.
I would say because look, the system of highway robbery, grand larceny, and theft is still going on Wall Street.
It is.
It's not unchanged. So you can't say that that there's anything done on either side of the house actually.
I don't know how to affix blame, but I do know that the Republicans are in charge, and they are deregulating.
Well, I know, but it began with, Obama was elected promising to carry on with Dodd-Frank, and he basically did nothing, basically.
I don't know if everyone would agree that Obama did nothing.
Well, he did,
The Great Recession could have capsized capitalism, and people were saying that at the time.
well,
But
sure,
it was very, very serious.
but what he should have done is actually let the banks go broke, because they were a failed business, and they could have been all wiped out, all the criminals on Wall Street, and the proper banks set up.
So you don't think that the Obama administration helped with the recession?
No, well, actually, the top money, yes. When the governments pump money in, which he did, nearly, 800 billion, naturally it revives the economy. Okay, naturally, that's Keynesian economics. So gradually the economy did recover, but it didn't cure the thieving, stealing, fraudulent gangsters in Wall Street. And of course, they've gone right back doing the self-same things.
They did pass some regulations that are now being thrown out.
Yes, that's correct, by the Republicans.
Yeah, but Glass-Steagall has never been put back in its place. You should have had a super Glass-Steagall. Nothing happened about that.
I would comment, just from the books that I've read, the ones that were written after the Great Recession, that they are in agreement that the Obama administration helped, but they would agree with you that they did not do nearly enough in the Obama administration. So I don't know what the politics of that were, but I would say that of the 4 books I've read that were printed since the Great Recession, they all said that the Obama administration did help the recession, but that they didn't do enough. That's all I know.
Probably couldn't.
Gene, I'd like to talk for a minute about money.
That's the question.
Yeah. So, right, that's what, okay, so what I would like for you to address, okay, is how money relates to the real world and how we should be making policy decisions around money or around the real world.
Okay, so you'd rather talk directly about wealth rather than the figurehead for wealth, which is money, right? Okay. I was surprised because the first one of these books that I read was the one about runaway inequality, which I still recommend it. But it more or less says that the crisis started during the last part of the Carter administration, and of course was mostly caused by the Reagan administration. And they blame the Reagan administration for having set the pattern that under which working people have suffered ever since. I was surprised that the other economists did not say that. They seem to agree on 1973 as the time that the new period began, because of an oil crisis in 1973. Remember the long lines we couldn't get gas?
Arab oil embargo.
I would have gone a little further, although they did not say this. It's just something I thought of as I was reading. They seemed to agree on 1973 being the line of demarcation for the new situation. I would have said that it had something to do with the end of the agreement that was made during World War II called the Bretton Woods. It might be Breton, B-R-E-T-T-O-N, Woods Agreement, which put the United States and the dollar as the currency for the world. And the dollar was pegged to gold. At that time they said, no matter how much gold you got, we'll give you $16 for every ounce of it.
32.
Not in 1944. It was later they changed it to 32. It was $16 per ounce for a while, and then later on they said, hey, this is getting too expensive. So they decided, well, it'll be 32, but it's still the same deal. The U.S. will buy your gold. No matter how much you got, no matter where you got it, we will always buy it at a certain amount. So to a certain extent, money was still connected to gold. And gold is a commodity. So the rules of commodities were in effect up until 1971. At that time, President Nixon said, well, we've had enough of this, and we're just not going to buy gold anymore. And you guys just do the best you can. Everybody stayed on dollars, and I think that had more to do with oil than anything else. I think America pretty much controlled the oil of the world, and they wouldn't sell oil for anything but dollars. They still won't. You have to have dollars to buy oil. They won't sell it for euros. That's why they killed Saddam Hussein. He wanted to sell oil for euros. That's one of the conspiracy theories I heard. But anyway, gold was a commodity, and its value came the same way other commodities came. I didn't get into how value is really created. This is the theory that they teach in school. Things don't have any value until they get to the market. So you could have a battleship that's worth nothing because there'd be no demand for it. So you got a battleship, you might have spent $20 billion building that battleship and it's worth nothing. Because when it got to the market, there was no demand. The price was down here somewhere. It was zero. You could have a toothbrush and everybody else's toothbrush melted or something. Or maybe you've got a better toothbrush or something. And you made it for 29 cents, but you got to the market with it and you could sell it for $3. Because the market determines value. I didn't get into how value is really determined. I don't think it's this way. I think this was just made up as a nice way of saying that capitalism is all you ever need. It's perfect. It's going to take care of you. You don't need government intervention. You don't need no insurance. You don't need Social Security. You don't need no stinking unions, because they just mess up the market. If you stick with this, everything is gonna go swell. The invisible hand is gonna take care of you. And that's what they're trying to sell you. Now, I don't think I got anywhere close to answering your question, Bob. So why don't you talk again? Because I have a notion you know your own answer.
No, I mean, I think you basically addressed the fact that,
Just cough, we can hear you. You're good.
some people need help. Anyway, I can't stand in front of the speaker. So, you know, basically, as you mentioned, money is a surrogate for what we actually value. I mean, we value food on the table, you know, we value things. Now, the market, or whatever, is a mechanism for loosely coupling money to what we actually value. So my question is, okay, if you're making, you know, decisions for the country as a whole, okay, you could always just print more money, whatever.
They do.
You know, and as long as there's a need for services, for instance, and you have workers who want a job, it wouldn't be inflationary to print more money. You know, because you're basically adjusting the value of money. You know, and but for government, the decision-making process shouldn't, in my opinion, be about money. It should be about what we need and how we go about producing what we need. And then, you know, adjust the money supply to, you know,
Yeah, but
match things up.
I suspect that you've gone beyond capitalism and what you're talking about. All of these books are about capitalism. They're about how capitalism should work, or how it actually does work, and how they're hoping it'll work in the future. And all of that it's all capitalism. There's not a single, there's maybe 3 pages in all of those books, well, except the one by Marx, but the books that, you know, normal capitalist economists write are about capitalism. And you're talking about some kind of a world where the economy actually does serve our needs.
That would be nice.
Yeah, this guy wants to ask something.
You quoted Reagan saying, "I want to take away all the money from the poor people and give it to the rich people." Where'd you get that? I never heard that one.
I made it up. I
Did
made
you?
it up.
You said-
But the Madrick book said that Reagan had no philosophy, he had no economics. But Milton Friedman came along and became the apologist and the voice for Reaganism.
That's a pretty rough
That's what he said.
translation of Milton Friedman. I watched Milton Friedman on YouTube. He has YouTubes.
Mhm.
And I never heard you say that one. Okay.
Okay.
Another way of saying it, it seems like
Make it a-
trickle
Is there anybody that has not spoken? Because everybody's got their hand up has already spoken. Okay.
Gene, were you here about a year and a third ago when we were in that other building? And Marilyn Hamaker gave a presentation about a new economic theory. Did you hear her talk?
No, but I know Marilyn, and I know her. I know what she's, what her, the zeitgeist of what she's. It's not new.
It's not, okay.
It's, the idea is that all wealth comes from land, right?
Labor.
From labor.
Labor. She's all about labor, that money is just a unit of labor.
Right, well, that's all true.
Well,
That's what Marx said all value comes from labor. But I didn't know Maryland said that. Maryland's father was an actual follower of, what's the guy's name?
Hyatt?
Huh?
Was it Hyatt?
No.
George?
George. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And he believed that all the wealth came from the land, which is you know, you can make a case for that.
Sure.
That all wealth came from the land. And they got that back in the old days because wealth in those days was mostly food. And food came from farms, so that, you know, the wealth is coming from the land. And the sheep's wool, you know, most of their clothes is made from wool. And so they thought it's coming from the land. Marx would have said, yeah, it comes from the land, but it's the farmer's labor that gave it value. If the land just sat there, nothing would happen. It's the farmer's labor who made value out of all that wool and all those foods.
Yeah, do you think that raw capitalism always destroys itself?
Rural world. Raw capitalism. That is a fascinating question because we don't really know. One thing people think is that capitalism has been around forever. I was arguing with Jeff just the other day, the guy sitting across from me, because Jeff said we've always had capitalism. No, we haven't always had capitalism. It was developed in the 17th century in England. And it was really, really clear with the East India Company and the Dutch India Company that the people who got their power by owning things were in charge. Before that, it wasn't what you owned, it was really how you were born. If you were the son of a king, you were a prince, you know. Or maybe it was based on your military power. If you were Genghis Khan, you could claim to be, you know, the ruler of Asia and Europe, you know, because of your military power. It wasn't because you had some paper and owned something. But when capitalism came along, and capitalism was a great improvement over the previous thing. When I was here before, I was talking about my science fiction novel. The guy, my hero in my science fiction novel, he thinks that the problem they had in the Soviet Union and in some iterations of countries that claimed to be socialist was that they wanted to destroy all the stuff that the capitalists had done. And Marx never said that. Marx said that capitalism was a really good thing. It was way, way better than serfdom.
Right.
Because all the regular people used to be serfs. And they had to work in the mud all day, making potatoes and rutabagas, so they could give them to the Lord, so he could come over and screw their daughters, or whatever else he wanted to do. Those were serfs. And serfdom was much better than slavery. And slavery was much better than savagery. You know why? Because before slavery, if my tribe defeated your tribe, we didn't have any use for you, so we would kill you. But later on, they invented slavery. And then, when my tribe defeated your tribe, we would enslave you, and you'd still be alive. So slavery was pretty good. Serfdom was a little better. Capitalism was much better than that. And Marx did not say you should go out and destroy capitalism. He said you should be able to move up to the next level. That guy back there, well, go ahead, you've already got the mic. Then the guy in the back.
I've had my. I've been halfway through Michael Hudson's book, the name of it escapes me. But basically it's, regardless of the name, he points out an important distinction that I think is an attempt to keep capitalism on the rails, and that's the distinction between earned and unearned income. And the need, I remember going to Mexico, and you could there's no tax on land. Well, what I began to realize is that it's just a way to preserve wealth for the rich. But anyway, it's just that if you have unearned income, you're the landlord, you make no contribution, you're taxed at a higher rate. We used to have that distinction in this country, and I think it was an attempt to keep capitalism from going off the rails.
From consuming itself. Yeah. Well, I think you could make the case that Keynesianism and the things that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did went a long way towards saving the country between 1932 and 1937. Unfortunately, according to the books here, in 1937 he decided to balance the budget, raise taxes, and started the recession again. And the recession then went on until the war came along, and they spent so much money on the war that everybody got a job, and the depression was over. But they would argue that Keynesianism was very, very good from 1932 to 1937. And if somebody has a different opinion, they're gonna, as soon as you get through grilling me, you're gonna get to come up and take the mic and give your opinion.
Why do you think that America has never really had a left-wing party? It's basically always had two right-wing parties.
That would be a really hard one for me, because you'd have to look at all the parties all the way through history, you know. I think the Whigs were way to the left of the Democrats, and I think the Republicans were to the left of the Whigs back in those days. So, you know, and even today, the Dallas Morning News calls Democrats leftists, you know, so they say that there is a difference. And also they say that there's becoming more polarized, and that there's more of a difference now than there used to be. Back in the days of Rockefeller Republicans, before the California Republicans, before Nixon and Reagan, they used to say that there was very little difference, and that there's a lot more difference now. So, but I think the essence of your question is correct. They've always had two parties that supported capitalism. They are definitely capitalist parties. That's why I'm not in Democratic Socialists of America. This is a really big organization now. It's 35,000 members, just since Trump got elected. There's one right there. DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. You know, they had a gigantic, historic victory on Monday. I don't know if anybody saw this. There was a little blurb in the paper about it. But on Monday, we went down to City Hall and delivered 110,000 petitions to get paid sick time for every worker in Dallas. That means you know who's rattling those dishes back there? Probably doesn't have paid sick time. But if we win this, he or she is going to get paid sick time. Every worker in Dallas. It's historic. It's a gigantic step. And I don't think they can turn us down. For one thing, the petitions are really good. They really sat on us when we were gathering those petitions and made sure that we got good ones. We didn't go out and sign up Donald Duck, you know, and Daffy Duck and sign our own name 10 times, you know. So we got really good ones, and then we got almost twice as many as they required. So they're not going to be able to turn our petitions down. The city council is now faced with, they either have to put it on the ballot or they have to just pass it and make it the law. The working people of Dallas are going to get paid sick time. 300,000 of them that do not have it today are going to have it. This is amazing. I got off track, didn't I? Okay, all the parties are capitalist parties, but they have had socialist parties. Democratic Socialists of America, the reason I'm not a member is because their goal is to take over the Democratic Party. And I say, they will never take over the Democratic Party. It's a capitalist party. The capitalists run it. They are never going to take it over. And even if they did, they would not be able to make any difference with it. Bernie came as close as anybody ever came to taking over the Democratic Party. And now they're watching out for him. So I don't think they're going to take over the Democratic Party. I don't think that's going to make the change. But there's certainly been political parties. I used to be in the Socialist Workers' Party. I ran for Congress in 1976 as a candidate of the Socialist Workers' Party in Houston. I got 150 votes. The guy who beat me got 40,000. So I had him scared, I'll tell you that. But anyway, there are parties that claim to be socialists. There are a bunch of them. I heard Dick Revis the other night talking about the old days of the student movement. He was talking about progressive labor. Anybody remember progressive labor? And their paper was called Challenge. And everybody remember the October League? These were, remember Revolutionary Youth Movement? Well, anyway, there were parties that you would definitely call left parties, parties that were intended to bring socialism to America. They just never had much clout, much ability. The biggest one that ever was the Communist Party, which I understand never had more than 100,000 members. And the Industrial Workers of the World, which is one of my favorites, the Wobblies, they never had more than 100,000 members. And that was just on paper anyway, because they didn't really have, you know, like cadre, you know, of people that were ready to march, you know. Where I come from in Ada, Oklahoma, we marched on Washington. We actually got our deer rifles. It wasn't really Ada, it was Sasakwa, which is 12 miles north of Ada. But the people of Sasakwa, the farm workers around there, especially tenant farmers. You know, Oklahoma was all tenant farmers around the turn of the century. They took up arms and got ready to march on Washington and overthrow the federal government with their deer rifles and shotguns. It only lasted one day, and then they all got thrown in jail. But I'm proud of that.
Turn of which century?
So the answer to the question is, why is there no left party like there is in Europe? For one thing, in Europe, the left parties, communist parties specifically, were the people who ran the underground against the Nazis. So at the end of World War II, they were very, very popular. When the Nazis got defeated, people looked around and said, who actually resisted them? Who actually blew up trains? Who actually helped with intelligence? And who actually fought them? It was the communists. They were popular. Remember who Tito was? Marshal Tito? Yeah. How about Mao Zedong in China? He was popular because he fought the Japanese. And when the Japanese lost, I'm not saying he defeated them, but they lost, Ho Chi Minh, why was he so popular in Vietnam? Because he's the one who fought against Japan. And so he was beloved all over Vietnam, and that went a long way for them. Here in the United States, they had a generally large communist party, maybe with 75,000 members or something like that, and they were very determined. Some of them were very, very good. Some of them were very smart. They wrote some really good books. They created some really good unions like mine, United Auto Workers. They did some good stuff, but some of us are old enough to remember what happened. The government came down on them with both feet in 1947. Their leaders were thrown in prison. A lot of them escaped to Mexico. People went to France. They were destroyed. They were torn to pieces. They're still a communist party. And I understand that when Trump got elected that they picked up here in Texas. I've been told they have 1,000 members in Texas. I heard that recently. And I said, you know, that's nothing like as big as DSA. They're much bigger. And the Bernieites, there's like 3 groups of Bernieites, and they're all bigger than the communists. And I don't know that they'll really get much bigger. So they don't have much of a program. Taking over the Democratic Party, to me, is not much of a program.
My probably last question I'm allowed would be, how is it that the working people joined the army of the attack on the American working person? There's been a war on the American working person, right? You've had wars on everything. You basically had a war on the American working person. How is it that the working person joined that army?
Against themselves.
Yeah.
How come,
How do you explain it?
the same question is, why did so many workers vote for Trump, right? Susan, you want to explain it?
Well, from 25% of my husband's union voted for Trump. And I see a lot of racism. That was one reason.
Well, it's
And authoritarian
various kinds of divisions.
divisions, but I saw a lot of racism. And I still do. And they are shooting themselves by voting for the Republicans because they'll probably want to privatize the railroad.
And they were pretty mad at Clinton.
They were mad at Clinton.
All the unions.
A lot of these guys were from my old neighborhood in Chicago, and they were the tribes, you know.
A lot of people associated bad trade deals with President Clinton. And I think that rubbed off on Mrs. Clinton. Even though she said she was not in favor of those bad trade deals, I don't think people believed her. And they did believe Trump. And they are still waiting to see all these wonderful things that Trump is going to do for the American working people. And it's liable to happen anytime now.
Yeah.
I mean, every time you pick up the paper, it says wages are going to start going up.
They are.
They've gone up a little bit,
2.3%.
but essentially not much. And that they're going to be, these trade deals are going to be done over so that working people will really benefit with the new trade deals. And I was here a month or two ago, and I said, you know, they're going to win my support when they do that. If they bring all the troops home from Korea, I would think that would be really good. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a trade unionist. I'm for working people. And they're not. They're two different parties that work for different parts of the rich people. I mean, the Koch brothers are pretty well taken over the Republicans, but don't think that the Democrats, even when Obama was president, don't think that they weren't mostly beholden to the rich, because that's where they get the money for campaigning.
Question, what is your comment on the recent trade war, of how it's going to affect, they were talking about the soybean tariffs from China on farmers are going to lose out with that.
Yeah. This is a really big topic. As I was reading in the last few months, since I sort of went crazy on political economy, I found out that the idea of free trade is not new. You know, I said a while ago that Britain ruled the waves. Britain rules the world pretty much. See, Britain invented capitalism a long time before anybody else had it. And they were strong. Their manufacturing was unparalleled in the world. Everybody in the world wanted manufactured goods from England. And during that time, England went around saying, we're for free trade. So they invented the idea. Free trade for them meant, to every other country in the world, open your markets to us. Trade with us, with no qualifications. Because they knew they had the advantage. So they were all for this free trade thing. Well, America was in the same situation at the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the United States ruled the world. Not just because they had the biggest army, not just because they're the only ones that had atomic weapons, but because they had the only factories that were still standing. All the rest of the factories in the world
you know, well, not all of them, but a lot of the factories in the world had been destroyed. All of Germany, most of France, most of the Soviet Union, they actually moved all their factories and everything back to the Ural Mountains. So the United States had a lock. If you wanted a car, for example, an automobile, say in 1949, I don't think, well, maybe the Fiat was making them. I don't know. Maybe the Italians were making them. But you pretty well had to buy an American car. That's pretty much all there was. And that started to change. In our lifetimes, a lot of us here in this room can remember the first Volkswagen we ever saw. Or the first Fiat, or the first Renault. And it was, we laughed at them, didn't we? We thought they were funny because they were so little and dinky. We didn't know they were going to take over. We didn't know they were going to take over automobile industry, but they did. So at the end of World War II, America dominated the world economically as well as militarily, and they were all for free trade. They were going around telling every country in the world, open your markets to us, for the same reason that England had done it back in the 18th century. Because they knew they had a lock. And today, Mr. Trump is saying those days are over. And maybe he's right. Maybe those days are over, because the United States is not the only place that has factories anymore. They don't even have the best factories. They don't hardly even make electronics in America. They hardly even make steel. You know, they got some steel plants that reduce, you know, they take scrap metal and make new metal out of it. But other countries are way, way ahead of the United States in manufacturing, in their technology, and their ability to produce commodities. So maybe it's just true that America's free ride on free trade is just over. But that's not what working people care about. What working people care about is wages and benefits. And we generally are in favor of free trade if it's going to make prices any lower, and it should. But at the same time, we want free trade agreements that don't lower anybody's wages and don't pollute the planet any worse than it already is. And those are the kinds of deals that they've been making. So Mr. Trump says he's going to make new deals and that they're going to be in favor of working people. And I am dying to see that happen.
You make dice.
Die. He'll die first.
He's gonna be out shortly.
I'm just curious, has anybody, to your knowledge, attached a name or an entity to the mystical, invisible, unseen hand that somehow guides and rules and controls everything from some mystical realm? Would it be a secret society? Would it be the people who own all the central banks of the world?
It would be most classical economists and neo-economists. According to my recent reading,
Laissez-faire.
that they believe in laissez-faire and that Milton Friedman would be somebody that they thought very, very highly of.
But it's still the central bank that
But it's not a cult or anything. But see, the government adopts these things and they hire people that conform with that. Like Pruitt, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency.
It's really the upper 1% of the upper 1% that own and control all the central bank.
You can bet that
That's
Pruitt.
the unseen hand.
You can bet that Pruitt believes in the invisible hand. You can bet on it. He thinks he's doing a good thing, allowing the polluters to pollute at will. You can bet that that's how he would cover himself. He'd say, well, the market is going to take care of this. So they're still doing it. The invisible hand it's like the mafia. And they used to call the mafia the white hand, didn't they? Or the black hand. Black hand.
We didn't
Well,
like that.
This is the invisible hand. But if they use that, I don't think they really believe it. I don't think Reagan believed it. I don't even know if Friedman believed it. But it's very convenient. If what your goal is to cut Social Security, if your goal is to get rid of unions, this is a very convenient ideology.
I got one for you. Assuming that, put it this way, the Midwest, different places, corporations have left town and gone overseas, left these people high and dry, they have no jobs, and they have no future. And this is part of why they voted for Trump. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is what do you think of putting tariffs on those corporations that have left our country?
Penalizing the country.
No, penalizing the corporation. The corporation getting rich, having left the country to go where labor costs are cheaper. And the end result is they're suffering. Everybody in this country is suffering. We get a cheaper price on, say, Apple produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. So we need some jobs here.
I'm mad at Apple.
Yeah.
Because they took all the money from their tax bailout and used it to buy their own stock.
Yeah.
Guarantee themselves.
I think it was $104 billion, and they spent like $2 billion just as a giveaway to their shareholders, just a dividend. And the rest of it they used to buy their own stock. Well, I think the question is, how do you feel about penalizing countries that take the work overseas? Corporations. How do I feel about penalizing corporations that take money overseas? I should say first that this was a part of the tax giveaway from last December. Prior to that time, they had a little difficulty repatriating that money. They would make a lot of money in China and they couldn't necessarily bring it back because it would get taxed.
Right.
And that new tax bill lets them do that.
Right.
So that's one reason why Apple is feeling so flush, because they had $1 trillion overseas, that they didn't want to bring back because it would get taxed, and now it's not. Or maybe they just lowered the tax on it, but anyway, they gave them a break like that. Now, I'm going to duck this question, but I'm going to duck it because I don't believe in tinkering with capitalism. I don't believe in, instead of having this, what do they call those taxes that? Tariffs. Instead of having a tariff on steel, why don't we have one on wheat, We can talk about that all day long, but I wouldn't want to comment on it because I don't believe in tinkering with capitalism. I believe in getting rid of it. Pure and simple. I'm not saying go out and shoot people. I'm saying that right now we live in a world where capitalists are creating commodities and doing a lot of things that they do very, very well. They drive down the price of almost everything. Something gets invented and it costs $50. Remember when the PCs first came out and it was $2,000 to get one? And then 5 years later you could get one for $500. So I'm not in favor of destroying them, but I am in favor of removing them from their power over the government. I don't think that 0.1% of the people should be running the country for their own interests. And I don't believe that I would try to figure out ways to make things work. The reason that I joined unions, the reason that I helped with the petitioning campaign on Monday, the reason I picketed that bank that I picketed on Tuesday, the reason that I did the radio program I did this morning, the reason that I started this, the reason that I'm here talking to you is because I think the system, I think those people need to be removed from power. And the problem is that people don't agree on how to do that or what to do about it. So that's why I'm trying to get people to study the nature of the system today and see how you would go about changing it with as little discombobulation as possible. I mean, I sure don't want to go through a famine. The guy in my book, he has to go through a famine.
And he goes through pollution so bad, you know, that nobody can breathe. And then things change. I don't want that. I'd like us just to, you know, all get together and change things in a nice, clean, easy way. And we tell all the people in Highland Park, go ahead and stay there, have a good time. Did you read that the people in Highland Park are going to they're going to allow the children of their workers to go to school there? If you were a teacher in Highland Park last year, you had to let your kids go to school somewhere else. Because they weren't good enough to go there. And the people, did you talk about noblesse oblige? Is that the way you say it? Noblesse oblige. Huh?
Noblesse oblige.
Noblesse oblige. They have graciously decided that if you're a teacher in Highland Park, you can bring your children and go to school there. Oh, I just almost melted when I saw that. It was so wonderful. I was so touched. Well, with as little discombobulation as possible, I would like to remove the 1% from power. And I would like us to find some way to do that. And to that end, I think we should be studying. I mentioned armchair socialist a while ago. It's a derogatory term. I especially don't like people who talk about socialism all the time and don't ever do anything. I don't have a lot of respect for what I call knee-jerk activists either. A knee-jerk activist is somebody that says, oh, there's a demonstration, let's go. And oh, that's a petition campaign, let's sign it. You know, without thinking it through. What's your program? What are you trying to accomplish? And how does this affect all that? There's a guy in the back.
What radio program were you on?
He asked about my radio show. It's at 9 o'clock every Saturday on KNON. I don't just spouse this stuff. It's a talk show. You know, people call in, and sometimes I get to answer them, but usually they just talk. So it's 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock on KNON, 89.3 FM. But a better way to listen to it is on your computer. It's knon.org. And you go to knon.org on your computer and click talk. And you can listen to Gene Soslow's show.
Yeah.
He's right there in the black shirt.
Right.
And that's a music show. And my talk show is there's very few talk shows left. But I still have a talk show called The Workers' Beat.
I heard you right. You don't like capitalism at all. You want to get rid of it. And
I want to go beyond it.
well, that's one way. So what's beyond this? Is it anything like communism?
Communism is a theoretical idea in which people are so enlightened that they all take care of each other. I don't think that we're anywhere close to anything like that. Socialism, though, is not so far away. When I was a kid, you didn't dare mention either one because it was so. The Red Scare was on, and everybody was terrified. And half the movies you saw were about, the subversives and how you had to take them out and kill them. And it was regular to say, we're going to kill all the communists tomorrow. It was just a saying. But today, a lot of people are saying they're for socialism. And as I said, the Democratic Socialists of America were involved in the petitioning campaign, and they did a very credible job. They helped a lot on gathering that 110,000 petitions. And for the first time, to my knowledge, first time I have ever seen labor and all the other progressive groups accept a socialist speaker to be one of the speakers. So at that rally, they very cheerfully announced so-and-so is here from the Democratic Socialists of America, and so-and-so got up and spoke on behalf of Democratic Socialists of America. I was very proud of them for that because I had never seen that, and it damn sure wouldn't have happened when I was young. Damn sure didn't happen when I was in the Socialist Workers Party. We were pariahs. Nobody would even talk to us. We couldn't even get in a union hall. Nobody would talk to us about anything. They were scared to death of us. Back in the early 70s. So, is it anything like communism? Yeah, it's going in that direction. The socialists think, and I don't think it was Marx who said this, so, well, Marx did say it, but the other guy, Engels, said it very clearly, that at some point we won't need government anymore. People will be so cool that they will really be watching out for each other. And Che Guevara wrote a book on it. I read the book, but I didn't understand it. But he said that he was talking about what he called the new man. And this new man would be somebody that was not out to cheat anybody or steal or sell faulty toothbrushes, or anything like that. And I think people kind of have an idea of this because of Star Trek. How many think Star Trek, the new generation, was the best thing ever on television?
That was pretty good.
Let me tell you a story from Star Trek, the new generation. I'm taking too long? Okay, Star Trek, the new generation. For some reason, they picked up, who wrote the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court?
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. They went back in time, they could do that. The spaceship would go so fast they could go back in time. And they accidentally picked up Mark Twain. He sneaked aboard. And he was going around smoking cigars. Of course, nobody smokes in the 24th century. It's gone, But he's going around smoking these cigars and wearing these old tacky clothes. You could almost smell the actor. He was just so rank. And he corners Commander Troy. Remember Commander Troy? She was half Betazoid. She had these big eyes. He corners her, backs her up into the corner. And he says, "Do you mean to tell me that in the 24th century you have overcome racism and divisions and you have actually achieved a society in which man does not exploit man?" She says, "Yes." Of course they had. It was Star Trek. I love that. I cried. That someday they're going to reach a point in which human beings do not exploit each other. Che Guevara believed it. So we might have said it wouldn't happen.
All right.
Do you have Beverly Shaw in the trunk of your car?
What's that?
Do you have Beverly Shaw in the
Yes, I do. All right, now it's your turn to talk. So, who wants to be first? You want to be first? All right, come on up there.
Tom has it in the trunk of his car.
I'll do it. I generally have always done it when Gene has been here, and I like him. And I agree with a lot of the things he said tonight and other nights. I have a question. Can anybody explain what capitalism is? Does anybody really know?
You wear a red cap?
Yeah.
Greed and lust for power.
Okay. And see, that is the common conception. The word has been bastardized.
By the participants.
And there are evil people at the top of every pyramid. I don't care if it's the government at the federal level, the state level, the county level, the city level, the individual companies, the industries, the unions. They're corrupt people. The legal profession, the accounting profession, every profession. This is humanity. We're not all perfect. We're not divine. Capitalism basically is the reason that we're not still living on $2.13 a day like the totally unindustrialized countries are. Basically what capitalism says is, as opposed to Little House on the Prairie, where you had all the little shops, and they operated individually. The farmers owned the farms, they came in and sold the produce, they got some money, they bought some things from the shops, life went on at Little House on the Prairie. That's when the country was 80% agricultural. It's not, it's reversed, more than reversed. Capitalism says, everybody in this room comes and hands Tom $10,000 and tells Tom to go start a company that will be successful and make some profits, it will create some jobs, and Tom will be able to send them a dividend check every quarter to give them some of their money back. And because he's going to be successful at it, because he's a good businessman, the value of their stock that they put $10,000 into, 20 years from now, maybe it'll be worth $30,000. They can pass it to their heirs or they can sell it and do something else. That's the concept of capitalism. Now, there are people who get at the top of that pyramid who exploit it. They're liars. They're dirty rat cheaters that a lot of us would like to take out and put them in a prison camp. And that's no exception to any other piece of our society. I'm sorry to say that. One of the simple things to consider is, if you remember back to school, capitalism is the opposite of feudalism. When we had feudalism, the lord, or whatever he was called in that particular country, he had a castle. And he had a family. He had servants. He owned all the land around it to some distance. Everybody was a serf, S-E-R-F. They worked for him. About all they got out of it was, unfortunately, must say, was what a lot of the industrial workers in the early years in the United States and the African slaves who worked on the plantations got, and that was enough to put food in their mouths, provide them enough energy to live and work, put clothes on their body, and have a basic shelter over their heads. Capitalism has done a lot more. We can bitch until the end of time about how much money the rich make, but the cold facts of life is the very rich. If you name off all the people who created the current high technology companies, we started with Bill Gates. We have Apple Computer, now he's deceased. All the others, every one of them, have created jobs, companies, business, taxes for the federal government out of thin air. Let me say one thing about taxes. The repatriation of our profits to the U.S. companies ended up like a lot of people thought. And that is, the companies did not have an idea of what to do with that money to go out and expand the business and make more money. So guess what they did with it? They paid dividends to all their shareholders. Were all their shareholders the rich? Crap, no. Many of them never even saw a share of stock, but they worked for a company that had a stock-owning, profit-sharing plan, and they profited from that. That money did not go to all the rich. The part of it that did, guess what they did with it? They didn't go put it in a box under their bed. They invested it in our economy. I've already talked too long. Tom's staring at me. I want to say a couple of things and I'll shut up. Our speaker made a comment tonight that I think is just so true. World War II made us rich. We were in the Great Depression. We were trying to recover from it. Women all stayed home. They did not work outside the home much. We sent a huge number of our boys and men off into the Army. We brought women in to run the factories and the offices and do all the things. They learned wonderful tasks that they could perform, and they could do them well, and they could make a good income. It totally changed our economy. But our speaker was correct. Our bombers destroyed a huge percentage of the factories in Japan and in Europe. And so what we experienced as economic growth and prosperity in the 15 or 20 years following World War II was the result of the fact that while we had old factories that we couldn't afford to update during the Depression years, they were out of date, they were inefficient, but they were the only ones working. And our workers were paid great salaries for operating them because we could ship our product all over the world. Well, guess what? When Italy and Germany and everybody else, England, built the factories to replace the ones that were bombed out, they were built new and they were efficient and they could produce better product at a lower cost than we could. We could not afford to pay our workers the salaries we were paying them anymore to produce products that we could not sell on the market for what it cost us to make it. That's a sad reality. I've got notes to talk another 15 or 20 minutes, but I've already expired my time, and so with those few words of hopefully some wisdom mixed in with the gibberish of Jim tonight, I will depart the podium. What I called that wire.
I assume I get an extension of time as well as he did.
No, he took some of your time.
You always take it.
The thing that I did not hear spoken about tonight, which I think is the essential part of what built this nation to such a great nation, was free enterprise. We talked about capitalism. Free enterprise meant that instead of taking that $10,000 and putting it in the hands of somebody's stock to have it grow for you, that family would open a shoe store or a bakery or whatever, moms and pop stores. And thousands of families had their own businesses and their own incomes under the free enterprise that built this country into a nation that it became. During the George Bush Sr. administration, NAFTA was put together and then passed and signed into law by Bill Clinton. NAFTA took and moved most of our manufacturing out of the United States because it allowed these companies to go abroad to where they're, compared to us, they were slave labor. Build their products there, send them back over here, and because it cost them far less to build them, their profit margin was much greater. Tariffs eliminate that. The tariffs will bring those countries. We had the tariffs before NAFTA. NAFTA eliminated the tariffs. The tariffs made it so that when a product was produced that was equal and competitive with one of our products, that the tariffs brought up the cost to the corporation equal to ours, so it was comparable. It's not to wipe out their trade, it's to bring the manufacturing back where it left from. What we had after the idea of, and the Rockefellers did a lot of this, of building up capital, more and more money, physical wealth. We had to, to put into law antitrust laws so that if one company got dominant and started pushing out the moms and pop stores and taking them over because they were dominant, that this would stop that company from getting so big and allow free enterprise to continue. When IBM had all the major computers with small competitors against them, and they also were selling not only the computers but the services on computers, where you didn't have to buy the computers, antitrust laws came along and made them divide those into two different companies to break up that complete cartel in the computer industry. When Microsoft was faced with an antitrust law because they were totally dominant in the PCs, they were going to be broken up. There was an agreement made, and that lawsuit just kind of vanished. And after that, every time you buy Microsoft software for your computer, back then when it first happened, there were 7 back doors in your software, so that through 7 different avenues, the government can come in without your knowing it whenever you're on the internet and look through anything and everything you have in your computer. That was the agreement to get rid of the antitrust law there. Thomas Jefferson, I've said this a number of times, made it very clear that if we let a private bank take over control of our money, that through inflation and deflation, ups and downs, and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land we have founded. That's the Federal Reserve, the private international bank, part of the Rothschild banking system, that we need to eliminate and go back to the constitutional dollar defined as 1 ounce of silver. England did have the largest worldwide economy that there was back in the 1800s and so forth. They would go in and they would conquer, occupy countries. And like in the United States, they had quite an industry in England of making clothing. And they had the cotton grown in the South in the United States, so hell, let's make it even more profitable. They started shipping in slaves from Africa. They brought the slave trade over here. And that's how we had that problem. And it was because they made unfair profits on it. You mentioned World War I and how these competitors in World War I wanted all these areas around the world. World War I was probably one of the biggest accidents that ever happened. These Serbs came over into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and while Prince Ferdinand and his wife were riding around in their carriage and all their people who loved them were waving at them and they were waving back, these Serb extremists came out of the crowd and shot them to death. Well, this enraged those people, so they launched a military strike against Serbia. Now, what nobody was thinking about was that Serbia had a mutual defense treaty with Russia, so Russia attacked the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had a mutual defense treaty with Germany, so they were obliged to go to the defense of them and attack Russia, which had a mutual defense treaty with France, and then England came in, and Italy, and the United States, and Spain, and the whole world fell into this horrible World War I. And most of the Allies, like a lot of the British soldiers, were going to get on the train and go to war. Mom, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll have this thing over with pretty quick. The worst disaster in human history. What they didn't count on was that the Germans were extremely advanced in their military weaponry, which was fine. We're very advanced in ours. I don't think any country would pick on us today. But Germany was completely surrounded by all of its own trading partners and allies in Europe. They were a very dominant economic country in Europe. Suddenly, everybody's attacking them. They didn't want that war. France didn't want the war, and none of those countries wanted that war. But they all got into it by the insanity of these mutual defense treaties, which I guess are good, but boy, it sure turned out to be bad then. Let's see. We need to get rid of NAFTA and GATT, number one, and get our corporations back in the United States so that they pay the wages here that they should be paying, and then we have better competition and we have jobs in the United States. One example that I love, Marla Morgan wrote the book Mutant Message from Down Under because of her experiences with Aborigines. She helped a group of Aborigines in the cities. The Australians considered them to be less than human, so they lived in just poverty. And she saw some of them getting high on drugs and that and the other. Sit down. And so she helped a group of these form their own corporation, get together. She said, I formed a lot of corporations, I can help you do it. And it was very successful. They realized they had a lot of insects in Australia and no window screens. So they built these little window screens they could put in the window, bring the window down, and pull it out to the window like we do with air conditioning units. And they were making these, and then they were very successful. And then she realized that the guy who comes in every morning and lays out all the tools, and who is the same guy who waits until everybody leaves and he hangs up the tools and sweeps up, then closes up, gets paid exactly as much as the president and the salespeople and the workers and everything else. And she said, well, why is this? And they said, well, what do you mean? Everybody in this company is essential just like anybody else. Nobody's better than anybody else. Now that kind of follows our principle of our founding fathers, that all men are created equal. And I would love to see a return to some of that. And I could go on and on, but you're getting impatient.
If you have a little closed economy, like a little ranch or something, as all the grandkids, and you see a couple of people that you're touring and you see a couple of people sitting in a chair in this little closed economy, and I say, well, what are they doing? And then they would say, well, they're unemployed. Well, that doesn't exist on a little closed economy. There is no unemployment because there's always something to do. You can paint the barn, you can clear the next field. So I think once we get into once we start expanding, we start using currencies and our money. When we have money, I think we start having these problems of unemployment and the business cycle and all that. So my point is, when you talk about capitalism, if you're going to really have a meaningful conversation, the thing that distinguishes capital to the different types of capitalism is one where there's a fixed money supply and one where there is a Fed where that can expand the money supply and basically, decide who gets the money too. So I'm saying is there's a big difference pre-1971 and post-1971, or even 1913 and pre and post-1913 when they created the Fed. So I'm just thinking, if we're going to have a meaningful conversation, we got to talk about what kind of capitalism, because if you can create all the money you want, there isn't a fixed money supply, all sorts of shenanigans start to happen. And if you look at the problems, everything was going well for a long time, I think in your speech, and everything changed around 1973. At least some people just say that would be 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard, and all of a sudden we started to have these giant deficits. So when you lose that control of a fixed money supply, you start having a lot of problems. And I don't associate that with a healthy capitalism. I see it as a sick capitalism. And so we got to decide what capitalism we're talking about. And just in general, talking about socialism, which I'm pretty much against. I just think the government does everything poorly. I mean, they become these big, slow, bureaucratic animals that just don't work well, period. And you have a tendency when you get these pyramids of power, you get. I think that attracts the psychopaths too. So I think that, as a general rule, I want all the decisions to be made at the lowest practical level. And then I think you want to avoid, as I see socialism, where you have the government making decisions, and because from what I see, the government is just slow plodding, subject to corruption, and bad in general. Thank you.
I don't know much about the economy, but I'm learning. I do have one little bit of trivia. And I couldn't believe it tonight when the speaker asked who are the billionaires in this group. I started to bring a list because about 2 months ago, Hank said, I wonder if there's more Democrats or Republicans that are billionaires. And so there's a list of, a lot of them are in Texas. Houston had the predominant, in Texas had the most. Worldwide, China. And as far as which party, I think it was like 65, it was either 65 or 85 were Republican. And the rest of it was divided, a small portion of independents and Democrats. Democrats were very small. And so that's my bit of trivia. Thank you.
I'll bring the list. She didn't vote for me. Let me go. Well, there's billionaires and there's billionaires. Well, you mentioned George Soros. He supports all the leftist cause like crazy. And he made $1 billion a day, according to Gene. But that record was broken by Jeff Bezos, the guy that took over Whole Foods and he took over Amazon. And if you look at him, he's a homosexual demon, and he's just a crazy person. And he made several $1 billion in one day. And just last week he made the news again, where he backed out of a deal where he was going to label the GMO. Whole Foods signed a deal. We're going to put labels on the GMO foods we have. And he said, well, no, we're not. Anyway, why did I get up to talk? Well, that was my little segue, because you got Oprah, you got all the people in the media, all the people that get involved with in the news and pushing politics are Democrats. Anyway, and then you got like Harry Reid. And they don't get in the news. I mean, you're Rupert Murdoch. You got some big Democrats. Anyway, I'm not going to argue with the statistics, but it's absurd the way it's stereotyped. The rich people on the right, and they're greedy. So I agree with Gene, the Democrats aren't any better. Why did I get up here? I had one point I wanted to make, because I see a lot of people here that cheer, just like it's a football game. This is supposed to be different than football here. We're supposed to use logic and evidence and reason to come to some greater understanding. I think Gene could have said anything at a certain point, and so why is this? We have a religious cult going on, and with any religion, it's not for you. It's mostly against Trump, and yeah. There you go. So, I think it's a danger, though, because I'll use religion, which is good, bad, and ugly, in the worst sense of the word. What we're doing here, we're using our minds, and we're using hopefully ancient Greek things, debate, rhetoric, and logic to get to people. So, I'm going to repeat something that somebody said. Not here, but on the internet. God bless the internet. He's wondering why so many people, especially now, at least publicly, on the left, seem to take this as a new religion, a cult. They get fervent. They're ready to kill for it. It's replaced the old-time religion. A lot of them are atheists. It's okay. I'm an agnostic. I don't know what's going on. But this is the new thing that's fundamentalist. And I think there's danger in that. And I don't know if you can see it or not. But one thing this man pointed out was that the nuclear family is a little bit like a socialist family, based on the need, each to his need and each to his ability. And so we tend to romanticize that. We say, hey, that's pretty darn neat. And here we are, we're a rich country. I hate to remind you, but there's no place better. Not Che Guevara's Cuba, not Mao's China, not Stalin's Russia, not Pol Pot's Cambodia. These are hellholes. These are screwed up messes. So anyway, for whatever reason, we got it pretty soft, and we're the soft target, and we have a lot of energy to be goodwill people, and we're being taken advantage of. And one of the key ways it's happening is that we romanticize socialism because the nuclear family, when you were a child, when you were safe and you were taken care of, that it basically has parallels in the socialist structure. And when you're a parent and you love your child, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to work like crazy for them, and you're not going to slack off and be corrupt. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work when you make it into a government. When you make it into a government, you've got communism. Now, we didn't mention this, but Mao killed more of his own people than the whole World War II. Stalin did the same thing. So, you know, and as far as wealth inequality, this communism, it just doesn't work. So, all I'm just saying is open your eyes and don't just glom onto a new religion. Put your pitchforks away.
Well, I could say a lot, but I'll only say a couple of things. Actually, this graph here is total nonsense because I've proved in the past that actually the supply curve is downward sloping. It's not upward sloping. In fact, it never meets. So I won't go over it again, but I proved why that was some time ago. Secondly, I guess I'm one of the few people here who grew up in a socialist world. After the 1945, there was a Labour government, and they really did wonderful things amidst a huge uncertainty and hardship. They brought in free education, free healthcare, and subsidized housing. And of course, when Thatcher came along at the same time as Reagan, they did away with free education. They sold off the housing, and they've done damn near their best to destroy the National Health Service. It's about halfway privatized now, so it's pretty much gone. Now, the other thing to say about capitalism, raw capitalism, it just doesn't work. I mean, we can see that. America has a huge federal deficit and a huge trade deficit. And basically, the real problem is that the people who really care about the long-term aspects of a company, like the people, don't actually run it. So the people who actually run it are the people who, in fact, they don't even own it. They're given shares, but they're certainly not the founders. I mean, there's this wonderful picture. Okay, guys got together, they put money into a company. The problem is that in a capitalist system, they actually didn't want to run it. But what they did want to do was liquidity. They wanted to get out. So that's why they always wanted the liquid market for their shares. Okay? And also, because of the stock market, everything is very short term. And in today's world, you have to have a long-term vision. And so the other thing, of course, is we have worldwide labor arbitrage, which means these companies run around the world finding the cheapest source of supply. And of course, like Welch said about GE, what he wanted to do, he wanted to put all of his factories on ships so he could ship it to the cheapest port he could find. Well, you know, this is not a stable situation. And this is why I think Trump won, because he said, I'm going to change all this, and blah, blah, blah. The fact is, tariffs won't do the answer. Now, back in Bretton Woods, which was referred to tonight, Lord King said, look, he proposed a system whereby you'd have mandatory balanced trade. You could not have trade balances continually. And I won't go into it because I've already talked about it before. So this system is bad. I mean, I'd like to see economic democracy. I'd like to see the working people own their own livelihood, like the yeomen of England, who were given parts of the common land. I mean, they could grow crops, they could farm and so on, and support themselves. But in this totally precarious economy we have, people have we have this you know, this gig economy where work is uncertain. Certainly in London, you can't, even graduates can't even afford to live there anymore. I mean, the whole thing is turned upside down because greed, actually. And greed is what wrecks everything. And it wrecks this system. But the big, I've talked about this before, the big problem is the American political system. I said the founding fathers looked back 100 years before the revolution to 1688 and copied that system, which was really a king under control of Parliament. And this is what we basically have now, and this system is ridiculous. I mean, what it is, the whole system is a system of bribery and corruption, because these elections go on so long, it costs so much money. And in England, you have a general election, lasts about 4 or 5 weeks, that's it. So you can't have this huge bribery situation going on. It's sort of unknown. And also, if you want the cabinet, which Trump has, well, that was what King William of Orange had when he became King of England. But that cabinet exists today in England. That's inside Parliament. So the Prime Minister gets elected. He or she must have been elected. And the officers in the cabinet all had to be elected. So you don't have these idiots off the street like DeVos and these other weird people who you didn't elect, but they form a cabinet and run the damn country. I mean, the whole thing is weird, really. The whole thing is weird. But the weirdest thing is this capitalist system, what it's turned into, and it just doesn't work. And so unless people could control their own livelihood and actually like wandered on in the Basque country in Spain, whereby the working people own the company, they elect the officers, they elect the CEO, and if he screws up, they fire him. Now that's the economic democracy. That's the way things should work. And these people have a long-term outlook. They're not going to they're not going to, sell themselves out to Japan. Like in England, every month or so, another company's been sold off, to Japan, to Germany. And of course, under the privatization under Thatcher, all public services have been sold off, okay? And who owns the railroads? The Germans. Who owns the London airport? The Spanish. Who owns the car companies? Not one English person. I mean, that's what happens under ridiculous lunatic capitalism, actually. And it's a disaster. And the big fallacy of economics is to say, oh, look at all these cheap goods, that come in, under this wonderful trade system we have. What unspoken is the fact that this trade deficit has to be paid for. And it's paid for by selling assets. So these goods aren't that cheap. And of course, from China, you get these shocking inferior goods coming in. In any piece of electronics, you take air conditioning systems, talk to any AC guy, he'll tell you that the capacitors and the contactors that come in are junk. And I buy them, okay? And so what AC guys do, they run around scavenging the parts that were made in America when there were decent parts made. So this free trade deal is ridiculous what's going on. I mean, it's yes, the guys at the top have made billions out of it, but the deal for America has been disastrous. The other political aspect is this growing power of China that's threatening the world, actually. So brilliant the whole thing was.
I guess I'm the last one standing, so deregulation, in my opinion, is like the free enterprise of burglars. That's just what happens. You have more problems. In this country, we've had, I ran for Congress 4 different times, and each time I learned something. And the first time, I took in $100,000 in campaign contributions, mostly from unions. The second time, I didn't get 10 cents, because they all went to Gephardt in Washington and said, where should we send the money? I said, send it to open races, send them incumbents, don't send anything to any challengers. Challengers, they haven't got a dime in elections. This is before the year 2000. That's why challengers can't win elections in this country. Incumbents win elections, that's it. You might primary an incumbent, that's about it. That's about the only way it's going to happen. So, in my view, and we have the best Congress money can buy, I've said that before. And what will change that? In my view, Congress will vote for free airtime the last 90 days of a general election. Why? Because they keep the money they raise, and there's no history of a challenger being an incumbent. It hasn't happened since before the year 2000. So once they put that in, some challengers will win some elections against incumbents because they'll get free airtime too. And then everything will change. Congress will then represent the people to do the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations that have left our country to go overseas, like Apple. Produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. Nothing. So the end result is we buy everything that's produced in China. It's shipped back here, we pay for it, and we don't have the jobs. And in the long run, we're going to lose because we're $21 trillion in debt right now, and it's growing. And where has it gone? Our corporations, our main corporations, have left the country to go where labor costs are cheaper in many cases, and they haven't come back, and they don't have the jobs here. And when you relocate somewhere else and you don't have any jobs here, eventually your R&D follows the corporation, and you don't have that either. So we're like England. Everybody owns them, and like John just mentioned, and they're in big trouble because they don't own their own country, and we're following in the same line. Now, it was brought up here before by our speaker that after World War II we were rolling the roost, that we had nothing to lose, so we pushed free trade all over the country, all over the world, and the end result was what we had for 20 years worked rather well. But now we're in trouble because our corporations have left town, they've gone overseas, we've lost the jobs, and people are in trouble, and this is what's happened. So, in my view, we need to do several things. Number one, we need to put tariffs on, we need to put Congress, we need to get our congressmen elected. The last 90 days of a general election need to be free airtime. And then you'd end up with people representing Congress that represent the people instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations, then you get some jobs back here. Then you might think about shortening the workday in this country, because that's how we got the 8-hour day. The 5-day work week is 1938. They reduced the work week from 10 hours to 8 hours. They reduced the work week from 60 hours to 40 hours. They did not cut the pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours and made it 10 hours. It's a federal law, not a state law. It affected interstate commerce only. And within 5 years, big business and labor went to each state legislature, put the small business people on a shorter workday because an Israeli company wanted to limit their competition. That's why we have the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week, and that's how the rest of the world followed. So in my view, maybe it's shorter workday. Automation takes its toll. That's another thing that's going on in this country. Machines replace people, machines don't pay taxes. So we went to a 6-hour day, didn't cut the pay, got the same take-home pay in 6 hours, we made an 8. Then you ended up with more people working, paying taxes. You have less people not working, draining taxes. The government get twofold benefit of increased tax revenue, not raising taxes. You have less bills to pay for people that aren't working because they are working. That would be a better future than we look at today. Our speaker brought up a point on, I'm trying to think what it is. I'm losing track of my brain here. Oh well, I better let it go. And we'll give it back to our speaker to comment and close the meeting. He's got the last word.
Certainly for the 6-hour day, just to get that. I think actually it could be a lot smaller, but we should have an index on the working day, and it should be based on productivity. And as our productivity goes up, we should work fewer hours. Actually, if that had been in effect during World War II, and we had been lowering the hours as the productivity rose, we would have a 2-hour working day right now, and we'd still be making the same amount of wealth. Okay, what is capitalism? It is my understanding that capitalism power derives from the ownership, I start to say from ownership of the means of production, but that's kind of the old Karl Marx version. But power derives from ownership, from being able to say, I have papers on this or that. I own this or that. And the reason I say this or that is because it might be a bundle of no good mortgages. It may not be the means of production at all. It may just be a bunch of no good mortgages, and power derives from somebody being able to say that they own that. People are corrupt and evil. I'm in favor of working on trying to stop people from being corrupt and evil, but I certainly don't like the way they run the country. And my idea is that they shouldn't be running the country. And I think they do, but I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think that our standard of living proves our superiority. Actually, our standard of living is not the highest anymore. Sorry if you're still going around telling everybody America's the greatest place in the world. We're 13th or 14th, might even be 17th. The Scandinavian countries are at the top of that pile in terms of standard of living, how well people live. It's not because they're socialists, it's just because their taxes are higher, I think. Industrialization certainly brought people up out of the mud. I was raised on a farm, a bunch of you probably were. And boy, that's hard work, and it's not very efficient. Small farms, very inefficient. That's why the big farmers have taken them over. Well, small farms are practically gone. But industrialization is certainly a good thing. When capitalism replaced feudalism, that was a great step forward. It was wonderful. When we had free labor instead of serfdom, I talked about that. Capitalists create jobs out of thin air. People's jobs come from needs. In an economy, like for example, just food. People need food, somebody else makes food, so they sell it to them. So it comes from the fact that people have needs. And I think we give entrepreneurs far too much credit. And I'm not so sure that, I don't know how, we didn't talk about China. Some people say China has gone capitalist and that's why they've become successful. Other people say they really are communists and that's why they're still successful, aren't they? They've risen to the second largest economy in the world, and I can remember when we used to say so-and-so doesn't have a Chinaman's chance, because a Chinaman was the worst thing you could be in the world. You didn't have a Chinaman's chance. So I'm not too sure what China is, but I know what I would like to see. I would like to see us remove the capitalists from power without removing all the factories and without removing the division of labor and the many, many good things that we have gained. And I cannot deny for a moment that capitalism was a great stride forward. You know, they say the same things about unions. Someone said tariffs will bring economic activity back home, maybe so. Someone said the government is spying on us. They certainly are. I feel sorry for that guy that has to live in Russia now and probably has a lousy apartment and not a very good credit card system. But he revealed a lot of the extent of government spying. I don't think the Federal Reserve is part of the Rothschild banking. And I think there's a little anti-Semitism mixed in that. The Rothschilds
Not a bit.
were Jewish, weren't they? But I don't think the Federal Reserve comes from the Rothschilds banking system. I liked the silver standard because I understand it better. That guy back there brought up what is money today, because it's kind of a fallacy, isn't it? I mean, you don't know what it means if the Federal Reserve can just go off and create billions and billions of dollars, which they did just in the last recession, and call it money. And that was peculiar. And so I kind of like the silver standard. The English certainly did run the slave trade. They ran everything, and they ran the slave trade too. That's true, but they did give it up long before the United States gave up slaves. There was a guy named Wilberforce There's a movie about him. Everything I learned in the movies. I don't think World War I was an accident. I don't think that if you brought corporations, there was a statement was made, if you bring corporations back here so they can pay good wages. They don't just go pay good wages. I mean, they might come back here. They're not going to pay good wages if people don't get organized. And I mean, that's the only way the wages go up is when people make them go up. Corporations are not in the business of giving away money. I certainly agree that all men were created equal. That was a great statement that they put in the formation of the United States. I think that there are bad people in every kind of system. I just don't want them to be in charge. That came up twice. The guy said that he would like to make, the guy back there said he would like to make the decisions at the lowest possible level. That's in my book. In my book, the one I'm working on now, it's a science fiction book, takes place after the revolution, and people have to figure out how they do want things to run. Well, in my book, they all belong to something like Nextdoor. Nextdoor is an app based on your community. Like I live in Kidd Springs, and I belong to the Kidd Springs Nextdoor group. And a guy just today was telling us about 2 kids that tried to break into his house. And he described them, and so now everybody in the neighborhood is watching out for those 2 kids. So I think Nextdoor is pretty good. And in my book, everybody belongs to Nextdoor, and they get to vote on everything that affects them first. See, everybody's in a Nextdoor group, the whole world. And eventually, everybody's going to vote on virtually everything. But the ones who are most affected get to vote first. And they get to do it, it's real easy because they're all on Nextdoor. They just put their password in and say, here's how I vote. So I like that, having decisions as close to home as possible. When we say we don't like the government, what government do we know about except this one? It's possible to have some other kind of governance. That's what I'm writing this whole book about. These people are trying to develop a better system of governance. And I'll admit it's science fiction, but I hope you got to thinking about it. Let's see. I didn't know that Jeff Bezos was a homosexual. I did read that he makes $275 million a year. And to me, that's suspect. I just don't think people should make $275 million.
He made several billion in one day. Did you ever see his
doubt it.
face, though? You ever seen his face?
I've seen pictures of him. I think it's true that people that are supposed to be thinking politically put it in religious terms. And I think that it's something to be wary of. Trump may do something good. He may really come through with these trade deals. He may make trade deals that end pollution. Now that's not his record so far. So far he's been for pollution all the way. He appointed Pruitt to the EPA and he got out of the Paris Accords. So, but he might, he says he's going to. He says he's going to make trade deals that would be good for working people. So I suppose it's possible. And I don't think Obama did everything great. I do think that working people were far, far, miles ahead under Obama than they were under Bush or Clinton or Trump so far. But I never believed that Obama was going to solve all of our problems. I was not aware that Chairman Mao killed more than 60 million people. I was not aware that Stalin had, and I don't believe it. I read quite a bit about the Labour government in England, and I hear about it quite a lot because Jeff Robinson, who was sitting right back there, he's also a big fan of the Labour government in England. And I read about how Thatcher took it apart and started privatizing everything and selling stuff abroad. And it was shocking. And you made the point that raw capitalism doesn't work. I didn't say that. I said it does work. It just doesn't work for you. See, that's why there was nobody in here that was a billionaire. Didn't you think that was suspicious? That put me on guard right away. I knew that billionaires did not want to hear what I had to say. They'd be here if they were. And I also knew that they are not worried about the economy. Because you were interested in the economy. They're not. It's working fine as far as they're concerned. So I don't think that capitalism doesn't work. I think it works great for the 0.1%. And even at that, it's kind of out of control. They don't really control it. I mean, nobody can control it. Things happen that generate all these books because they contradict what the economists have said up until then. Okay, somebody was for economic democracy. I'm certainly for that. Right on to you for saying that. Greed wrecks everything and is wrecking the system. I like that. I think that some of the so-called free enterprise guys are free enterprise burglars, as Tom said. And I want to come back to this idea about capitalism being a very good idea. Because if you were spending your days in the turnip field up to your knees, you ever see that movie Tessa the Turbervilles? Tessa's this really pretty woman, played by Natasha Kinski. And she fell out of favor there for a while with her family. She had to go work in the turnip fields. Up to her knees in manure, you know, digging those turnips up for the Lord. And they didn't get to keep the turnips. I guess they got to keep like every fifth one or something like that. But yeah, capitalism was really, really good. And people say this about unions. They say, unions used to be really good, but they're not anymore. Well, I say that about capitalism. It used to be really, really, really good. And now it's become a drag on our well-being and happiness. Also, just on socialism or some post-capitalist way of doing things, I'm not sure what it would be. It might not be socialism, but something better than what we got. They would say, if I really had a plan, and I laid it out, people would say, it looks good on paper, but not in reality. Well, think about it. Does capitalism even look good on paper? Not even on paper. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
So they kick us out of here at 10:30. Our speaker's here, we want to talk to him. Our formal meeting is over with. See you all next week, hopefully. And thank you very much for attending.
Hey, John.